Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming in person and on Zoom. And today, the presentation is about FRS, GMRS, and MURS, the public non-amateur radio services. My name is Mason Fewer, call sign KF7HVM, and I'll like to share with you what I learned. Maybe. Next slide. So first, I'm going to talk about the commonalities of FCC Part 95. And Part 95 consists of FRS, GMRS, and MURS, as well as a lot of other public radio services down here at the bottom. I'm not going to talk about a lot of the ones on the right, and I'm not going to talk about the remote control radio service or CB in this presentation, but I just put them here because they do all go together and they are covered by the same Part 95. So all Part 95 services are for the general public and business use. There's no expectation that users of these services have any technical knowledge. These are consumers using this for communication. The other interesting thing about these services is nothing governmental is allowed on them. You know, foreign or domestic governments are not allowed to operate in these bands, and a license may be required. So the default for Part 95 is unlicensed. So unless a particular subpart specifically says it requires a license and lays out the stipulations for that, anybody that meets the operator qualifications can transmit in these services. And some of those, for example, might be like operators 18 years or older, operators a US citizen. Those are the kind of constraints that they put on there that are outside of like a license that you actually have to apply for. And some interesting particular statutes I wanted to point out in the common space for all of these services. Upfront, operation of non-certified transmitters is prohibited. So that's really one thing that sets the Part 95 services apart. All of the radios are certified according to rules given by the FCC. Manufacturers have to apply for those certifications, and anything outside of that, not allowed to operate on the band. Station identification may be required. Again, this is like the license thing. By default, the station identification not required. So some services will impose this. And finally, all the channels and all services are shared. So there's no users that have exclusive access to anything in the public radio services. So even grandfathered in licensees, commercial entities that operate in these bands that have been in there for decades, they're not primary. They have to share with the public users as well. If anybody has any questions as we're going through that are relevant to the slide, feel free to stick a hand up or grab the microphone in the room and ask that as we go. Otherwise, there'll be time for that at the end as well. Okay, so comparing with the amateur radio service, we got the public services on the left, that's Part 95, amateur, Part 97. And I kind of put the bullets here opposite each other where they contrast. So in the public services, like I mentioned, equipment has to be certified. In the amateur service, typically equipment is not certified. The operators themselves in amateur radio have to pass a license exam, technical knowledge test, and paying a fee. But once you have that, homebrew and modified equipment is allowed. Like back in the early days of the amateur radio service, like people were making their own transmitters. Hams have access to bands where no commercial equipment exists. So you have to make your own stuff or modify other equipment. That's explicitly not allowed at all in the public. So I wrote here, pretty much the only thing you can modify are like changing the battery and replacing parts of the exact same part. Other big difference, all of these public services that I'm going to be talking about are channelized. So the FCC in the regulations defines the center frequencies, the deviation, and the maximum power for channels. And they explicitly do not allow like front panel VFO. Like you're never going to buy a radio for the public radio services that will allow you to tune the frequency. That's just not in the rules. Yeah, we have a question in the room. Can you pass the mic to Mike? Just talking to the mic part. Yeah.
Yeah, Mike, my question is, does the FCC monitor the Part 95 like they do the 97?
To what extent do they monitor Part 97? I think it's really going to be in response to complaints from stakeholders. So maybe back in like the 60s and 70s, the FCC would go out looking for people to break their rules. Pretty much now is just not the time or budget for that. So they will definitely, if you write them a letter about violations, like they might investigate it if they have time, but I don't believe there's any proactive hunting for the rule breakers out there. And this whole discussion is kind of going into the rules a lot because that's what we have. And I feel like understanding the rules are important to understand what the service is intended to be used for. And if you are planning on breaking some of those rules, it's important to know what they are. I'll get to that a little bit later. To finish this slide, the last big difference here is for Part 95, business use is largely okay. With few restrictions. So you can't advertise your business on the public radio, but you can use it to conduct your business. You can, give employees radios and allow them to transmit to facilitate the running of a business. In the amateur radio service, that's not allowed. All use is non-commercial, and in the regs for Part 97, there's this great quote I pulled out that the amateur radio service exists for the purpose of self-training, intercommunication, and technical investigations carried out by amateurs. That is, duly authorized persons interested in radio technique solely without a personal aim and without pecuniary interest. So I had never actually heard that before. I've been a ham for 12 years, and that was the first time I read that blurb. And that, I think, really sets it apart from what the purpose of the public versus amateur services are. I mean, amateur is really about exploration, pushing the technical boundaries, non-commercial, and public is just about facilitating everyday activities of the general public. Hey, my emoji got squished. That was supposed to be a circle. Anyway, the other section in the commonalities describes the prohibited uses, and these are prohibited for all of the services. I'm not going to read through all these, so I just flash them on the screen, but this is about what you'd expect. I mean, you can't break the law, you can't interfere, you can't transmit obscene messages. One thing I'll point out, it specifically says like language or meaning. So if it's obscene, it's obscene. It doesn't matter the words that you say to convey that message. It is the intent of the communication. And then finally, any false or deceptive stuff prohibited. Which brings me to the first part. How am I doing on time? Good. FRS, the Family Radio Service. So this is subpart B, and this comes up right after the common stuff if you're reading the regulations top to bottom. And the family radio service is defined as a short distance, two-way voice communication service with limited data applications between low power handheld radios, blah, blah, blah. So one thing that's interesting here that I didn't realize before doing this research is that FRS actually allows data, and it's built into the regulations. They allow AFSK modulated data. So like AX25, like what I talked about last month with packet radio, those types of transmissions are allowed on FRS. The rub, I don't know of any commercial product which supports those kind of transmissions. And so if there are transmissions on there using uncertified radios, maybe those aren't actually allowed. So kind of a chicken and egg here. They wrote the regulations with an eye toward what was possible and not closing too many doors. But at the same time, it's going to be up to manufacturers and vendors to decide what the public actually gets. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
We got one in the room from Rick.
On your interpretation, would that be like DMR maybe, or P25 on the FRS frequencies?
No, negative. The regulations are actually pretty specific about the types of modulation that are allowed. And for FRS, it's just AFSK over FM, basically.
Okay.
I got an interesting thing to say about that when I get to GMRS at the end here. So the nuts and bolts, FRS is UHF. It's above the ham 70 centimeter band. And there's two kind of sections where the channels exist, 462 megahertz and 467. On FRS, every channel is limited to the narrow band 12.5 kilohertz. And on, so there's 22 channels total, and they're all in the, well, aside from the main GMRS channels, the FRS channels are interstitial. So do I have the channel list here? No, I don't have it on this one. Sorry, got too far ahead of myself. Go back. Yeah, so what that means, wow, this is really, so there's 22 channels, and on some of them that are shared with like the GMRS, they have a limited 467 megahertz have limited to 0.5 watt output power. And the reason is those are interstitial channels that exist with a 1.25 spacing from the main GMRS channels. So they limit the power output to try and avoid interference with what they call the main channels, while providing more options for people to find a clear frequency. And the FCC is very strict about the antenna for FRS. So the antenna, it talks about what it means to be fixed. It has to be an integral part of the unit, cannot be removed, cannot be replaced. And I thought it was also interesting, they specifically say it has to be vertically polarized when the transceiver is held in the normal orientation. So I don't know why they needed to throw that in there, but if it's in the rules, it must be important. And finally, FRS, commissioned in 1996, kind of started by Radio Shack, actually. They were really the first ones pushing for opening up FRS. And it got commissioned in 96, and they updated it in 2017, redid the channel list basically, and made it more interoperable with GMRS. And then finally, in 2019, they changed the rules again and said that you cannot sell GMRS and FRS combination radios. Why is this? When I get to GMRS, it might make more sense, but the idea was to make it very clear when you're operating an FRS radio, you don't have a license and you have limited power and bandwidth. And when you're operating GMRS, you do have a license and you have higher limits. So I think some manufacturers were maybe playing a little fast and loose with how their radios operated. And just to make things clear, they stopped doing that kind of dual certification. What else about FRS? So no license is required at all. Go buy the radios and use them immediately. And because of that, no repeater usage. So you might hear a repeater on your FRS radio, but you cannot interact with it. No networking, no remote control. Like, this really is a walkie-talkie service. Like, I don't think they market base station FRS radios. Not sure what the point would be if you could only do 2 watts and have a fixed antenna. So really, FRS, when you think about FRS, think about bubble pack radios. That's what the term means, and that's what the service is really for. And the reason why it's separated is, I've mentioned all this regulation getting certified. It makes it easy for manufacturers to sell walkie-talkies, basically. I mean, the certifications for GMRS and the other services are so much more onerous that, it's harder to make and less approachable for end users. Like, what license do I need? It's confusing. FRS, dead simple. Buy it, turn it on, pick a channel. The other nice thing, since 2017, all the channels are shared with GMRS. So if you buy FRS and then move to GMRS later, your FRS radios are still going to be good. You can give them to your kids. They can use them for shorter range stuff where less power is necessary. You think of FRS, great for like camping. Go to the campground, let the kids run around with a walkie-talkie. Maybe there's no cell phone service, and keep track of them. That should say 70 centimeter band. That's a typo. FRS and GMRS, they use a shorter antenna, higher frequency than the 70 centimeter band. That's a typo. It's going to go on the video as a typo. Oh well. Any questions on that?
Technically, it's true. It is a shorter antenna.
For all the pedants out there, it is not wrong. I literally was putting these slides together 2 hours before this, so please bear with me.
Question?
I think that was Jim on the line. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sorry about that. I was thinking, so the GMRS, they're separated from the FRS. Were there old radios originally that had both?
Yes, there were. And technically the frequencies are the same. So the only differences between an FRS and GMRS radio are going to be in the power output, the bandwidth, and whether or not you can transmit split frequency. So back before 2017, back before 2019, there were certified radios that were allowed in the FRS and the GMRS service. So you'd like flip a switch in the settings and you get access to the higher output powers. But like I was mentioning before, the FCC kind of closed that loophole to make it more obvious to users when they're operating GMRS versus FRS.
Okay. I was thinking some of the old, and I might have one, an FRS radio that seemed like the FRS had, I don't know, the original ones were like channel 1 through, I don't remember, 12 or 14 or something. And then when they came out with the 22 channels, I was told, I don't know for sure, but I was told that like the upper channels, like say 14 through 22 are the GMRS channels. So I didn't know if the radio, maybe once it was in those channels, maybe the radio switched power automatically or just left it the same. I don't know, but it's interesting when you were saying, I didn't know that they changed that to separate them now, which it makes sense.
Yeah, so when I get to the GMRS section, I have a table that lists the channels, and I'll talk more about how they renumbered stuff to make make it make more sense. And maybe if you still have questions, then you can bring them up then. I think you wanna go?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, we're gonna switch to Butch here in the room.
I was thinking, I read somewhere that if you do have an older radio like that, you could still use it, but they just quit manufacturing them.
Yeah, that is correct. Pretty much all of the FCC rules, they grandfather you in. So like if you have a transceiver that was certified, you can use it. Kind of like if you had a previous license grant on these frequencies that doesn't match with the new service, like you can keep using it. They just apply going forward. Thanks for that clarification. Check this. Okay, that's
I'm
not.
confused, but I'll wait till you get to the GMRS.
This takes so long to change slides. I don't know if it actually went or not. The animation. All right, so next section, I'm going to be talking about MURS. Why didn't I go to GMRS next? Well, hopefully that becomes clear. So the idea of MURS is, I mean, it sounds just like FRS, right? It's a two-way short distance voice or data communication service facilitating personal or business activities, blah, blah, blah. That's basically just like FRS. The difference here is MURS is operating in the VHF band. So this is 3 channels on 151 megahertz and 2 channels on 154 megahertz. Still limited to 2 watts output power on all channels. And you can see the bandwidth requirements kind of vary depending on if you're in the lower channels or the upper channels. And I think of MURS as really analogous to FRS. So it's different from GMRS in that when we're dealing with MURS, it's low power. It is totally unlicensed. There's no repeaters. As far as I understand the rule, there's no network connections. So this is very much like point-to-point simplex, but on VHF. There is a difference in that in MURS, you can have an external antenna, which makes a big difference, especially, getting into VHF, you're going to want a longer antenna to get good signal out there. And there's a brief regulation about how high that antenna can be. So yeah, data is allowed, variety of formats. MURS is more ideal outside the city. So VHF works better in the country, less buildings and structures. MURS, it may be less used than the UHF services, particularly in metropolitan areas. You're probably not going to encounter MURS as much as the other ones. In certain recreation circles, they tend to favor the UHF stuff, smaller antennas. So you could find some clear bandwidth here in MURS if that meets your operating requirements. But you definitely will hear Walmart if you're next to one, because they are grandfathered into the upper channels, the 154 megahertz channels. Walmart, Sam's Club, they have custom radios that work on those frequencies, among others, and you will hear them. Like I mentioned before, it's all shared though, so they will attempt to tone you out with CT tones, and you're not supposed to intentionally interfere with anybody, but they have to deal with other users on the band. You'll also hear Dakota Alert, which until I started monitoring MURS 2 years ago, I had no idea what it was. But basically, if you listen to a MURS channel long enough and you're around one of these, it'll say like alert zone 2, alert zone 3, you'll just hear it. And it's a commercial product. It's mainly used by like ranchers and farmers and stuff. They like put them on gates and motion sensors and then monitor them from inside their house. So this is an example, like a commercial product leveraging this public radio service. And yeah, they are certified. So that gives you an idea of how these services are intended to be used for an individual, but marketed and sold by a manufacturer. Shorter antenna than amateur 2-meter band. Copy and paste lets you down. This is actually true here. So this is 151 and 154 megahertz. It's going to be higher frequency than the amateur 2-meter band. I mention this stuff because it's high enough to where if you're trying to transmit or receive on these frequencies with a antenna that you might use for other services, it is going to be non-optimal. So if you plan to use these kind of services with certified equipment, you want to loosen that little set screw and shorten your antenna a little bit and test the SWR to make sure that you got it right.
Run data through this. By chance, has anybody run any CW through it?
I would suspect not. In most cases, well, so from what I read in the regulations, these are like FM modes, and some of them allow AM, some of them allow like data over FM. But most of the regulations around Morse code identification say audible tone, which to me implies you have to make an audible tone and then encode it with FM and transmit it.
Right.
So I don't think you can do like straight tight bandwidth CW on these frequencies. Certainly there's no equipment which would facilitate that legally. Were you raising your hand, Shrev? Oh, okay. I can see you on the screen, and then every once in a while I look over and see you. All right, and these are the channels. So we got the 3 in the lower portion of the band. Those are 11.25 kilohertz, which is a unusual bandwidth. It's below narrowband FM. It's something to keep in mind for people who might try transmitting on this band with non-certified equipment, that's going to be higher bandwidth than what the regulations allow. It's not really easy to get equipment that'll go 11.25 from the ham market anyway. And then the 2 at the bottom, blue dot and green dot, those names come from like the stickers that were on the radios that they use at Walmart. So that's where you'll see those. The other channels have unofficial names too, like channel 1 is the calling frequency. Channel 2 is for safety. And I think channel 3 is like emergency traffic. But as just arbitrary distinctions. Like I said at the beginning, it's all shared. Nobody gets priority. Try not to interfere with others. Can't intentionally interfere, etc. With all of these, tones are allowed. It's like PL tones, pretty much used across the board to filter out unwanted signals. All right, now I'm got GMRS finally. GMRS, what everybody cares about now. The General Mobile Radio Service, subpart E of part 95. So this one reads really, the description anyway, down here in the lower left, reads really similarly to the FRS description, but they added the word mobile. So that's a key word here. Mobile two-way voice communication service. Limited data applications, that's the same. And then there's the clause for facilitating activities of individual licensees and their family members, including to blah, blah, blah. The big difference with GMRS is to operate on this service, despite having the same channel designations as FRS, to operate under the provisions of the GMRS rules, which allow higher power output and wider bandwidth, you're required to apply for and obtain a license. There's no test involved, it's public. So you just have to fill out a form and give the FCC some money. And they're like, hey, great, here's a license, good for 10 years. On the next page, I'll show you who it's good for, but it's ideal for families because the one individual license covers immediate family members. This is the same channels, the same frequencies as FRS. So this is a UHF service. It's broken down a little bit different. So we have the 8 main channels, and I'm specifically not talking about numbers here because in the regulations there are no numbers mentioned. There's the main channels, and those are on 462 megahertz. And then there's the 8 repeater pairs, and those are +5 from the main channels. 20 kilohertz bandwidth and a 50-watt power limit. So this is comparable to like a 2-meter mobile that the hams would use in their vehicles. The other channels, and maybe I'll describe those more when I get to the channel list, but I mentioned briefly the interstitial channels are 1.25 offset from the main channels. So they have lower power output limits to avoid interference since they're so close. For GMRS, repeaters and fixed stations allowed on the main channels. So unlike FRS, we have repeaters here with the split operation. Interestingly, this mode or this service, GMRS, supports AM data and voice, as well as sideband. I haven't seen any equipment that does this, so keep in mind, like they write the rules, but then it's up to the manufacturers to go make the radios that we all get to use. But it's interesting to see that, you know, AM and sideband are allowed, and data modes. So this kind of opens up the door for maybe some of the interesting like modes that we see on HF, SSTV kind of things, more efficient digital voice encodings maybe. Like they're doing a thing called free DV on HF, which is a digital voice mode that's open source, encoded in sideband, narrow bandwidth. It could be potentially used in GMRS as long as some manufacturer jumps through the hoops to get it certified. So that's what we're all waiting for. And then yeah, FM and pulse modulation, data and voice, just like FRS. So here's where I promised I would show, you know, who is included in individual and family. These are the relations that are specified in Part 95, Subpart E. Spouse, children, grandchildren, stepchildren, parents, grandparents, step-parents, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and in-laws. You could make a case that covers pretty much almost anyone you're going to talk to. Especially if you live in Rainier. So yeah, repeaters are allowed, remote control is allowed, no auto patch. So that's interesting in the rules. It says you can hook it up to a phone line to control the repeater, but you can't make calls over it. And then it also specifically says that the repeater owner may allow or disallow individual operators from using their machine. How they do this, I don't know. It's kind of a here's the rules. How does it actually work in practice? And maybe you have to change your code or your tone every day. I don't really know, but it is in the provisions that the repeater owner has that control to either tell people to get lost or to say this is private and only these people are allowed. Yeah, we got a question in the room from Mike, so grab that microphone and yeah.
Yeah, it says an ID required. Do they give you an ID like we have our ham IDs?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So when you apply for that license and it gets granted, you get a call sign that is 4 letters and 3 numbers. And they're a mouthful. They suck to say. There's no vanity calls, and you have to give it every 15 minutes. Mine's WRDV 267. I don't think there's anywhere to go to look it up. Like maybe you can go look it up on the FCC website. But like there's no QRZ for GMRS, and in practice, you don't really hear a lot of IDs on there.
I think you look up in the FCC database. I've seen,
I'm pretty sure you can.
I've seen GMRS license.
Yeah,
especially for-
there's a license search just like your amateur radio.
Okay.
Yeah, and mine's WRON 363.
W Ron. At least that's mnemonic. Too bad your name's not Ron. All right. Any other questions in the room before we go on here?
Well, I thought.
Microphone.
Let's say a group, they could apply for a license, like an off-road club. Then all the members of the club could be underneath that license.
That's a new one for me.
Okay.
Didn't see that in the
Okay,
rules
well,
when
yeah,
we
see that.
applied.
Okay,
I was reading the rules today, and it specifically says individual licensee only, and that covers your family, like I mentioned here. And then there are grandfathered licensees that are granted to organizations. And if you got one of those before 1987 and you continually renewed it, you can continue to operate it. So that would be the only provision for a group. That'd be like a business could have one GMRS license and then their agents could all operate.
my other clarification, I know like on businessman, I don't think you can talk from one, let's say two people shared the same frequency. Like we used to share it with Columbia Security Patrol with our frequency. And we was under pressure, we couldn't talk to him. So in GMRS, can you technically talk to another user?
Yes. Yep. And in GMRS, you can talk to any other user and you can talk to any other FRS user. So that's specifically allowed because normally you can't use a radio certified in one service with another service. That's like the blanket rule, except GMRS and FRS. They're explicitly allowed to talk to each other. There's also an interesting provision in the GMRS rules. Now, let me go back. I think I captured part of it on the last slide. If I can go back. It basically says that you can help people. Voluntary assistance in the event of an emergency is the phrase. And so they are kind of intending it to be like a community thing. So you can get on there, you can run nets, you can help people if there's an emergency, you can call for assistance, that kind of thing is mentioned actually in the rules. Yeah, so better antennas, more power than FRS. You can still talk to each other. So that's, you know, like I was saying with the camping thing, you can have like a GMRS base station with a high antenna. And if the antenna is high enough, then you can talk to these walkie-talkies that are pretty far out there with their fixed antennas on FRS. You're picking them up with your external GMRS antenna. You only need one license for that. Looks like we have another question in the room. We'll go to Mike.
Neighborhood pest here. You mentioned something about you could do a GMS radio and communicate with a F8 with the other side.
FRS.
Yeah, FRS. So you could basically run 50 watts with your GMS and talk to a ham operator. Or not a ham, but a CB operator. That's really
No, you can't talk CB because they're totally different bands. So
okay.
CB is 29 megahertz. GMRS is up at 462 megahertz.
Oh, so
So
then-
no equipment is going to support both of those
Okay,
unless it's
okay.
like super homebrew. What you can do though with your 50 watts, like I was mentioning, you can get out farther and talk to an FRS handheld, for example. And they might be able to hear you even if they can't transmit back to you.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, looks like maybe Jim's coming in for a question here. Or is he just saying, hey? Okay.
I'm all good, thanks.
All right, so the GMRS timeline, I just throw this in here because I love history. Band was actually first channelized back in the 60s. It was called the Class A Citizens Radio Service. And it was also partly shared with Part 90, so you could apply as a group and get authorization to use these frequencies. And then in 1987, that's when that stopped. So that's when it became all individual licensees with the family exception, and every business or group that got in before 87 could still be in. And if they renew their license, they could continue to renew it. So that's how the FCC grandfathers stuff. In 2017, that was kind of the big change where the FCC started aligning FRS and GMRS more. So they allowed FRS radios to transmit 2 watts on the new GMRS channels in the 462 megahertz range. And I don't know if it doesn't seem like an FCC thing because the FCC doesn't mention channel numbers, but around this time that the newly manufactured radios started renumbering their channels so that they could interoperate more easily between FRS and GMRS. On the next slide, I'll show that list. It'll be really small, but maybe we'll be able to talk about it then. Yeah, and then in 2019, they stopped selling the dual certification units. And finally, 2020, the license cost went down from $70 to $35. And that's for a 10-year term. Now, as Rick would like to say, we're all waiting for that to happen. And GMRS is going to explode once they finally put that price drop through, but we don't know when it's going to come.
I need clarification on that 2019. The dual units can no longer be sold. What constitutes one of those units? Because I have a 2-month-old FRS GMRS radio that's totally certified and it talks to all channels.
Is it FRS certified though? Because it might just be GMRS certified.
From Bridgecom, they're not exactly a Chinese company.
So I suspect Ralph wasn't mic'd, but he was asking a question about a radio that he bought that's FRS, GMRS, and fully certified, and how is that possible? And I think it's probably being certified as a GMRS radio. I think that you're expected to have a license to operate it.
Right, because it's GMRS.
Because it's
But
GMRS.
still, it's
Well, before they would sell radios that were FRS or GMRS. So if you didn't have a license, you could operate it in FRS mode with limited power and reduced bandwidth.
I still could. So it's kind of a play on words here.
Yeah, I mean, well, all this is a play on words. So I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about rules that nobody's monitoring, that nobody's going to enforce on frequencies that don't go far enough to matter. So what is the whole point of this?
Because somebody else bought one too from a different manufacturer.
What's that?
One of these radios that's dual. It's FRS and GMRS.
Oh,
So I mean, every GMRS radio is going to operate on the FRS channels.
Right.
They're the same set of channels.
Right.
And I am licensed too. I'm also got a call sign.
so I think once you get to your channel list, you might explain a little bit. Oh, it's different than what I was thinking.
This is the channel list, and the text is pretty small. I had to shrink it to try and fit it all on the one page here. So over on the far left column, this is like the FRS channels and what would be considered like the new GMRS channels post 2017. What you see here in the second column, the GMRS, this is old GMRS. So if you had a device from before 2017, your one channel started up here. So I think that's maybe what Jim was talking about earlier, how the GMRS 1 is actually FRS 15 and so on going down after they added the extra channels to FRS.
For that, confuse you more.
Right? So I think most people now are sticking with the list on the left. You're selling a 22 channel radio, and if it does GMRS, then it's also going to have access to the repeater pairs. And those are just going to be offsets from the 15, 16, 17, 18.
So 8 through 14 is FRS, right?
8 through 14 is FRS. That was in the original FRS commission.
Yeah, so 1 through 7 is 5 watts on a GMRS radio. And what, 1/2 a watt on a FRS radio.
No. So 1 through 7, you can do the full 2 watts on FRS,
And
you
5
do
watts
5 watts on
on
GMRS.
GMRS. And then, what is it, 8 through 14 is your FRS channels. And they're limited to 1/2 a watt on a FRS radio and 2 watts on a GMRS radio. Am I correct?
Negative. So channels 8 through 14, these are the 467 interstitial channels. So because these ones are in between the repeater pairs, these are limited to 1/2 a watt and 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth for GMRS and FRS.
I was thinking it was 2 watts, but I might be wrong. But anyway, the top 8 repeater channels, you can run them 50 watts. And you can also use the same channels on simplex 50 watts.
That's correct. Yep.
Yep.
So GMRS, the ones that start at 462.5 and go up 2.5 each or at 0.25 each, those are all 50 watts. Those are the original GMRS allocations. And then you can do the full 20 kilohertz, not quite wideband, but 20 kilohertz bandwidth on those.
R6 is Jeremy Rapp's repeater.
Yeah.
R6 has Jeremy Rapp's repeater.
Yeah, 675.
Which works quite well.
Yes, it does. You would have handheld down the Kelso area.
Yeah, so in the room, they're discussing Jeremy Rapp's GMRS repeater on repeater pair 6, FRS channel 20. Trying to remember if there's anything else I need to say about this. I think that's it. If not, I can come back. And then, just to throw this quote up again, if anybody had any doubts whether their Bofang with certain settings would work on GMRS or not, it will work, but it is not allowed, like explicitly not allowed. It's saying no GMRS transmitter will be certified at all if it can operate in a service that doesn't require certification. So you're never going to have a GMRS and a ham radio in the same unit. By definition, it's not allowed. It's not going to be certified, and if it's not certified, it's against the rules to use it. So that's where we're at here. Let's just wipe away any doubts. If you want to use GMRS with the letter of the law, then you need, or the letter of the rules, then you need to buy certified GMRS radio.
What's the advantage of using GMRS via or 2 meters? What will be used now? Is there any advantage between that?
So there's a question in the room. Is there any advantage to using GMRS repeaters over the 2 meter 440 ham repeaters that we already have? Is that the question? I mean, the advantage would be you don't have to be a ham to use it. Yeah. So, this comes up in like public safety, like community preparedness, that kind of thing, or like family preparedness, communication plans, the kind of thing where like you need comms when cell phones and other things are not going to be reliable, but you need comms with people who are not radio nerds, who aren't going to go study for a week and go take the test, not because they couldn't, but because they don't care. And they don't want to know how to operate a transceiver and how to program it to use different frequencies and set up the splits. I mean, it's technical stuff. And I'm sure your non-radio friends, they're just like, okay, do it for me. And at that point, that's what these services are really for. It's to do it for me, but I want a radio. So that's the point.
So the
Give
advantage I
the
can
mic.
see over this one is, like you're out hunting or someplace like I am up there, or if you're out fishing, you want to communicate with your home base. A CB doesn't have quite that much power, but if you get one of these, then you can go 50 watts go a lot longer way. I'll stop my head where I can.
Yeah, that's true. So the comment was comparing to CB, you only have 4 watts if you wanted to communicate with a home base. I think more so than just the power output, we're also dealing with like significantly easier to work with antennas. I mean, you're talking CB, that's a huge antenna. And any shorter than that, you're compromising. Whereas with GMRS, that's a short antenna and has high gain and it's easier to work with. So you're going to be more reliable too. You're transmitting FM, you're higher frequency. You don't have to deal with skip. You don't have to deal with the other negative things that come up operating lower frequencies.
I was gonna mention it, Mike. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Butch was next. Go to Butch in the room. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the two main advantages, I think, is one, the license is good for the whole family. And two, if you're out making money and stuff and you're talking on this GMRS radio, it's still legal. But if you're out on talking on your ham radio and making money, you can't do that. So I think those are the two main advantages of GMRS.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I'm not sure where the line is drawn for using ham radio like while you're working versus to facilitate your work, but definitely if you don't want to worry about that gray area, GMRS, that's an advantage there for sure. And then just getting everybody on board without having to have everyone get a call sign and you're dealing with non-technical folks, so you don't want to impose that on them. Yeah, we'll go to Rick.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, like, my wife will never get a license, but sometimes I need to communicate with her. So that would be a good case. Now, and a lot of the people that have side-by-sides, 4-wheel drive clubs, motorcycle, I don't know, motorcycle people adapt it yet, in cities in the CB. That you don't have, plus you put tones. So it'll just be your group and you won't hear other chatter too going down the highway too. And I know they're talking about in the GMRS, there's like a little groups on Facebook where they're trying to fix up different channels, like channel 17 would be the call frequency. So if you're on the highway, you'll leave your radio on 17 and be like R52 basically. So I think they're trying to get organized. And down in Medford, Road River, they actually got 2 linked, and listen, wherever that wildlife, I think they got 2 linked repeaters down there they talk back and forth on. So I think it's a future for some people.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Rick.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Like at the lake, your club members
Yeah.
all get licensed and
Yeah.
communicate with each other.
All right, it's drawing to a close, which is good because I'm drawing close to the end of time. I've been talking about this the whole time, but I kind of wanted to make it explicit here at the end. The rules are the rules. And I've been talking about the rules for the last hour. There's just no way around the fact that, like, if you're going to transmit on these bands, you need certified equipment. And that unambiguously excludes ham radios that we all already have. So if you want to follow the rules, those are the rules. Now, that said, every individual operator is responsible for the transmissions they make. And the practicality of some of these services in terms of interoperating with family members that, you know, are non-technical, or, you know, using, you know, more of the spectrum that is available for the public. My advice is only break one rule at a time. And to do that, you have to know what the rules are. So it's unlikely anyone's going to care about these transmissions if they follow the spirit of the rules. If you stay within the power limits, if you stay within the bandwidth limits, if you stay on the channel centers, and basically operate your non-certified equipment as if it were certified, I don't think it's likely you're going to run afoul of the FCC. That's my personal opinion. You know, everybody is responsible for making their own decisions about what they transmit on. But, you know, if it came down to it and I, you know, needed communications and I had a GMRS radio and a ham radio, I'd keep the ham radio. I'd pass the GMRS radio to the person who is GMRS licensed, or turn the power down to 2 watts and pass it to somebody who's not licensed, and not give them the ham radio, not give them the power, because that's crazy, but take responsibility for the transmissions that I make with that equipment. I'm not encouraging anyone to break the rules. In fact, I believe you should all follow the rules. That's all I have for this presentation. So I'm going to open it for discussion now. And it looks like we have a comment from Steve in the audience. So go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I think the temptation is when you get a Baofeng, it covers those frequencies. And so you have a removable antenna, which is not an FRS permitted, and you have way more power than FRS permits, but you have the frequencies covered. And probably the bandwidths are too wide also, because they're standard channel widths. But it's right there in the radio for 20 something dollars. You got this 5 watt FRS FCC violator.
And you know, it's going to be cheaper than probably any GMRS radio you can buy, because they did not bother to do the certifications that you'd need to operate on that service. So yeah, and I think you know, particularly with that radio, a lot of people get it and they're like, well, okay, I can't transmit on the ham bands. And the reason why you can't is because people will hear you and get pissed. Make sure that you don't. But I can transmit on these other ones, so I'm not going to do any research to figure out the rules. But like, here's a chirp CSV, and I can just dump it on there and go to town. And I think that is really not good for these services. I think Rick was next, but is this topical from what I was saying, Butch? Okay, we'll turn to Rick first.
The only thing I was going to mention is something, I think it was called Race Radio, and they're taking the Bell phone radios and remarketing them in some of the different clubs as off-road radios, and they were pre-programmed with all those frequencies. And I think the FCC ended up jumping on, because they literally buy the you know, the ball phone and remarketing them as race radios, and even some of them I think ended up on ham radio frequencies, mainly on the GMRS.
Yeah, see, that's absolutely the kind of thing that the FCC should enforce. You know, like if you're talking about an individual programming their radio and making individual decisions about when they push the PTT button, yeah, that's hard to enforce. But like if you have a company like profiting off of this kind of like violation explicitly, I'm glad they stepped in. So that's like what you want to see. We'll turn to Butch. Oh no.
No, I just had one little statement, and it's been around since, I don't know, I've been around radios for what, almost 30 years. But if you're out in the field or whatever, and you have a dire emergency, and my wife loves this part, a dire emergency, and you need to get a hold of somebody fast, doesn't matter who you are, you can grab up whatever radio to get help there as soon as possible. And then something like that, you'll be all right. But if you cause interference is where you mainly will get in trouble.
Yeah, that's it's definitely, I remember reading that in the amateur radio service, and I was I was trying to find the part of the rules where it says that like you can use any frequency, any mode, any means in the event of emergency, as long as you stop when the emergency is like resolved or when another form of communication is established. I couldn't find it. I'm sure it's in there. It was on the test. I'm sure it's in there.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's in the advanced class book, because I've been going through that. It's there.
Okay, but what I didn't know is, does that apply to any individual and any kind of radio? I mean, that's the assertion that you're making, Butch. But like, if I guess I wonder. I don't know if I just picked up a police radio or some radio at an event that I needed help. Like, it's probably okay, right?
Well, it would be like if you have a cell phone in one hand and a radio in the other, you better use the cell phone.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. But I mean, if you're out there and that's all you have, and you have actually have an emergency, then it would be all right. Of course, I don't know, like Jim and I have been around public service radios for like ever, right, Jim?
Well, maybe not ever, but yeah. Yeah, definitely on the amateur radio band, it does say that any person can grab an amateur radio in emergency. And I'm not sure about what you guys have talked about, like the FRS or GMRS, you know, or even a police radio. I mean, if it's emergency, who cares is what I'm thinking about. If it's emergency and it's legit, spank my hand later, you know, as long as help is coming.
Yeah, sure. I think that's the philosophy of it's far easier to ask for forgiveness.
Question on the repeaters. Obviously, there's no coordination.
That's correct.
Has there been any problems anywhere in heavy areas with interference?
I'm sure there are. I have not personally heard any stories about interference with GMRS repeaters, but you will hear them, you know, especially when you're up pretty high, scanning through. Like, you'll hear Morse code IDs on GMRS frequencies. Yeah, I don't know of any coordination. I think people just set them up and, you know, put tones on them, and if they're getting interference, probably just move the channel. In most cases, you know, you have eight channels to choose from. So Butch has a comment here.
I'm kind of thinking California is really populated with GMRS repeaters down there. Our area here, we have maybe two. And I was thinking, I was reading that the one on the hill over there is closed. You actually have to get permission to use it from the owner.
You're talking about the Meisner one?
The Meisner one?
Yeah, it's not listed, so I would assume that's the case.
But anyway, I was thinking I read that. But anyway, and then there's Jeremy's, and that's it. There's no other repeaters around here. So
I thought there was one up north. Yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, but one up north is not. I don't know. You're gonna have to have quite a bit of power to get up there, and maybe up on the top of a hill or something. But,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be more popular though, and I don't think this is going to not be a problem. You know, like as more people put repeaters up, like it's going to get tight. I guess we'll see. Do you have anything else, Jim?
Yeah, about the repeaters. I mean, obviously it has to be commercially built. Have you ever seen a repeater that when you get a repeater, do they have the options of all the 8 repeater channels, or is it something that you have to, as a repeater, pick a channel and dedicate it that way?
The repeaters that I've seen, I'm not sure how certified they were, but I think all the channels are available. Maybe if somebody in the room knows otherwise, they can comment. But I think you just change the channel. It's supposed to be plug and play, and because of the interference issues, I think they anticipate people needing to temporarily change where their repeater's at. So I'd suspect they're available. I don't have any hard data to back that up.
Thanks.
I got one more.
All right, we got one from Rick in the room here, passing the mic back.
I've been following this GMRS thing. I'm finding it fascinating. I don't understand how they're doing it yet, but they're actually tying GMRS together through all stall nodes. I think they got their own private network. And I know there's a few systems linked up.
Yep, that is allowed.
It's kind of interesting.
One of the things that you might find interesting, Jim, I haven't done extensive research on this yet, but the data capabilities on GMRS might be of interest for doing like SAR activities, where you said you don't have a lot of ham radios in the field, but if a manufacturer had an APRS-like system on GMRS, that could be really great for like small scale tactical deployments where you have multiple people out there reporting positions back to a central location, or a digipeater that relays those packets to the other handhelds. I'd be really curious to do some research and see if any manufacturers are building a system like that, because it's definitely possible within the rules.
Yeah, that's right, because you said they can send data. So, and basically, what was that, the AX2025?
AX25, yeah.
That's a good point.
All right. Any further discussion or commentary?
One comment,
Yeah, Glenn, go ahead.
the radio itself has to be certified, but the accessories, the microphone and stuff is not. So couldn't you hook a standard TNC or sound card modem up to it and use that for any type of data communication you want to do?
Yeah, that's a good point. I believe that would work.
It's just
I'd
like
have to-
these so-called repeaters. Well, they're not really repeaters, what I saw. They're 2 standalone certified radios, one operating as a receiver and one operating as a transmitter, and just building it into a repeater network with a duplexer. It's not really a repeater.
I'm not 100% convinced that repeater is fully within certification.
But I think that's what people are doing.
I think that's definitely what people are doing. Yeah, absolutely. So that might that could be a jump then, Jim, if we can find existing certified radios that could be easily attached to a TNC. I don't see anything in the regulations that would prohibit that. There are things in there about like filters and audio deviation levels and like, how the microphone is set up. I think those are, directives like to manufacturers, like it has to at least be within these specifications, but it went way over my head when I was doing the research. So I mostly skipped those sections. I don't know if that has any impact on connecting to an external device. Write that down. All right, well, that's all I got. Room's getting quiet, so I'm gonna stop the recording here. Guess I'll make one last pass if anybody's got anything that they want to get on the record. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much for coming and listening and participating, not throwing any tomatoes. See you next month.
Thank you very much.